The Sun and Wayward Stars by ThBiButterfly. Chapter 11. Not Now, Not Ever. Leaning his head back against the cool stone, Regulus inhaled the crisp winter air. All week, the weather was unusually warm for December, but today Mother Nature decided to shift. He was relieved to find the frost on the grass this morning. The bitter cold fit the sharp sting in his chest. After his row with Potter and Sirius, he'd found himself excluded for the rest of the day. Peter was sent home, and Regulus did what he always did: found a place to hide. Regulus tapped his head listlessly against the stone. He was so bloody tired of this, all of it. Just one chaotic day after another, with a whole week of the same stretched out in front of him. The holiday was fast approaching, and he couldn't be less interested. When he'd bolted out of his room, he'd at least had a good sense to grab Remus's jumper. He'd buried his hands in the two long sleeves and wrapped his arms around himself. The clove he'd climbed into was frigid, but it was quiet. It couldn't be seen from the Quidditch pitch or from the back door, so it was perfect. Someone would have to walk all the way around the garden to find it, and no one did. Earlier, he'd heard Potter and Sirius talking in low tones as they walked out of the wooded area. He'd intentionally blocked them out, covering his ears with his knit-covered hands. Regulus didn't think he could handle one more secrets or revelations at the moment. Being around Sirius and his friend was exhausting on all fronts. Shivering slightly as the breeze picked up, Regulus buried his face in his arms. This was what he deserved, what he needed, really. The shock of cold ice and isolation relieved the overwhelm he'd faced this week, and give him perspective. He knew he'd presented a rather awful vision of himself thus far, and was just too tired to maintain it. Not that he was particularly interested in revising their impressions in any way. Regulus was simply sick of the whole thing. He wanted to go home. Well, not home, just not here. A soft glow of warmth spread over his body, startling him. He lifted his head and scanned the garden, but didn't see anyone. Regulus's brow furrowed in confusion, but he relaxed back against the clove. It had to be a warming spell, but he didn't see who cast it. "Sirius?" he whispered, glancing around. "Try again." "Potter." A deep sigh filled the air, quickly followed by a miserable groan. "Regulus? Call me James, dang it." "Where are you?" Regulus asked, shrinking back in the clove. "Why can't I see you?" His disappearing act was Regulus's least favorite part of this entire interaction. It terrified him to have an enemy he couldn't see. Potter appeared right next to him to the wall, surprising Regulus. He lurched back, hitting his head on the stone. Wincing, Regulus rubbed the back of his head. "Is that really necessary?" Yes it is," Potter interrupted rudely. He shoved something into his pocket of his jeans. Regulus looked up at him warily. "What do you want?" "I want to give this back," Potter said, pulling Regulus's wand out of his pocket. "I really didn't mean to keep it, but once I had it, I realized you couldn't hex me again." Snatching the wand from him, Regulus immediately hexed Potter, sending him crashing to the ground. Growling low in his throat, Potter hauled himself up to his feet. "All right, I probably deserved that one." "Yes, you did," Regulus agreed, eyeing him darkly. Potter held up his hands as he moved closer. "I don't want to fight, Regulus." "Then leave me alone," Regulus huffed, turning away from him. He wrapped both hands around his wand and held it tightly to his chest. It felt like a piece of himself was pressed back into its place. I can't. Regulus' hat snapped to the side. Why not? He shrugged. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me either. Potter tousled his curls carelessly, leaned against the wall next to the alcove. I did try, but I can't. Try harder, Regulus retorted. Regulus, Potter pleaded, swiveling around to face him directly. Please, give me a chance. To do what? Regulus asked, leaning as far back to the alcove as he could. Potter was getting entirely too close to him now, and in his fractured state, Regulus could feel his nerves tingling already. Potter lifted a hand towards Regulus's face. Without a second thought, Regulus pointed his wand at his sternum. Hesitantly, Potter brushed aside Regulus's hair and smoothed his thumb over his cheek. Regulus stared at him, jerking away from the touch uncertainly. What are you doing? He breathed out, panic quickly setting in. He leaned closer, ignoring the prod of Regulus's wand against his chest. Potter met his eyes with a soft smile. This is also necessary. Without another word, he pressed his lip against Regulus's cheek. Surprised, Regulus nearly dropped his wand. He quickly muttered a knockback jinx that sent Potter flying across the garden. The powerful spell startled him. He hadn't intended to hurt Potter, simply push him away. Regulus inhaled deeply, re-establishing his control. Then he burst from the alcove. His unaffected expression slid firmly into place as he strode across the garden to where Potter lay, sprawled across the shrubbery. This bastard didn't respect one word of what he said to him. Even after he tried to manipulate Regulus into his show of skin, Potter was still intent on using his sexuality against him. Enough was enough. Pointing his wand at Potter's jugular, Regulus glared. I should kill you for that, Potter. I'm sure even my brother would find it justified. Potter tilted his head to the side and smirked. You're cute when you murder us. Are you pissed? Regulus demanded, staring at the bloke in front of him incredulously. You can't say things like that. Why not? Regulus pressed his boot against Potter's shoulders and shoved his wand tight against his throat. You don't even know me, Potter. If you think for one moment I'll allow you to use me, you're mad. You won't let me get to know you, Potter persisted, leaning into his wand tip. I'm trying. Don't! Regulus snapped, hexing with a body bind and stalking back to the house. He heard Sirius calling out behind him, but refused to acknowledge him. The fucking audacity to kiss him like that! What was he up to? Potter was taking his prank way too far. He was through with playing nice and avoiding trouble. If Potter tried that again, he'd better be prepared for a fight. Regulus shoved aside the warmth that filled him when Potter touched his cheek. It was so tender and sweet, he nearly melted. Closing his eyes tightly as he turned to his room, he slammed the door behind him. He took 3 long strides and then face-planted into his bed. He pounded the heels of his hands against the bed, shaking his head furiously. This was a disaster of his own making. How had he become so weak? Did he fancy James Potter? No. No. James, are you listening? Sirius asked, shoving his arm. Regulus glanced up from his novel to find Potter staring at him intently. He looked pointedly at Sirius and then back down at his book, ignoring the blush creeping up his neck. Potter blinked rapidly and dropped his gaze, turning to Sirius with a dazed expression. Sorry, zoned out, he replied, propping his chin up on his hands as he listened to Sirius. Staring at his novel, Regulus wasn't sure if he'd read a single word on the page. He couldn't remember the main character's name or where it was set. Closing his eyes, Regulus tipped his head back against the chair and laid the open book over his face in exasperation. Every time he tried to read, images of Potter's face flashed through his mind instead. It was beyond distracting. It was destructive. Thankfully, Sirius and Peter seemed intent on keeping them separated. Regulus hadn't been alone with Potter for the last 2 days. It was probably for the best, really. His body completely betrayed him after that kiss. Forgetting all the warnings and ignoring all of the barriers he so painstakingly created the moment Potter walked into the room. He could not fancy Potter. It would be a nightmare. That stupid kiss was to blame. It wasn't even a proper snog, and yet here he was, struggling to function. Regulus huffed in frustration, thoroughly annoyed at his wayward thoughts. The bloke was a complete twat, and Regulus hated him. It made no sense. Peter cleared his throat, nudging Regulus' shoulder. "You alright?" "No, I'm an imbecile," Regulus groaned, scrunching his face up under the book. A soft chuckle escaped Peter as he patted Regulus' arm. "It's not that bad, Regulus. Bit dramatic, don't you think?" Regulus told Peter about the kiss in a fit of anger after it happened, and already regretted it. "Just kill me now," Regulus whispered, dropping the book to his lap and pressed his face into Peter's shoulder. He tried hiding in his room, but Sirius dragged him out. Peter was allowed in the lab and had rooted him out of there as well. Peter laughed harder, shaking with it as he tilted his head. "Pretty sure James would murder me if I tried." His eyes flickered up the table as he snorted. "He's already plotting it, I think." Peering out at Potter, Regulus spotted the narrow-eyed glare he aimed at Peter. He rolled his eyes and leaned back against the settee, throwing his arms over his face. "Do not leave me alone, Peter. He's going to do something stupid. I feel it. I will hex his bollocks off, and then Sirius will hate me." "Merlin, you're worse than Sirius," Peter teased, still giggling. "It's just a little kiss on the cheek, at that." "He's done the same to me, and I'm not swooning over." "It's beyond mental," Regulus insisted, rubbing the heel of his hand between his brows. Ever since Potter pointed out the wrinkle there, he'd fixated on it. "It doesn't help that he keeps staring at me like that. It's disturbing." Peter prodded his arm with one finger. "I'll protect you from yourself, but if James tells me to get out of his way, I'm gone." "Sorry, mate. My self-preservation instinct is stronger than my loyalty to you, I'm afraid." Regulus squinted at him. "Where's that bravery Gryffindors are always bragging about?" "Nah, it skipped me," Peter snarked, grinning at Regulus. "At least where James is concerned. He's scary when he's determined." Regulus groaned quietly, tugging on Peter's sleeve. "How do I get out of this, Peter?" Arching an eyebrow, Peter stared at him incredulously. "Why would you want to?" "I'm losing my bloody mind," Regulus retorted, eyes widening in a slightly mad level. Peter leaned away from him. "I see that." He shook his head slowly. "There's no escape at this point, Regulus. He's claimed you. It's the best to just accept it." Evans didn't fancy him back, so she could maintain her frigid demeanor to avoid him. "You're fucking melting, and he knows it." "That's not helpful," he groused, crossing his arms over his chest. "I refuse the claim, and I accept nothing." "Don't tell me you're going to fight this," Peter demanded, sitting up straighter in his seat. He glanced between Potter and Regulus, then scoffed. "You will lose and make a fool of yourself in the process. I'm calling it now. Just admit it. You fancy him." Regulus ruffled a hand through his hair distractedly. "I refuse to give in. He doesn't know me, and I definitely don't like him. It's just physical, and I am not going there with him. Especially since I don't believe for a second he actually fancies me. It's just a game, his attempt to control me, so I don't take Sirius away. I doubt that highly, Peter countered, bobbing his head side to side. I've never seen him show this much interest in a bloke before. Besides, James wouldn't fake interest for a prank. That's just mean. Very reassuring. Thank you, Regulus replied dryly. Oh, don't take that tone with me, Peter warned, wagging his finger at him. I'll bow out of here so fast. Regulus lurched forward and grabbed his arm. Don't you dare. Sirius cleared his throat, then waved a hand in front of Potter. What's with you lately? Startled out of his revive, Potter took off his glasses and rubbed a hand over his face. Regulus watched him from the corner of his eyes as Potter attempted to rein himself in. He turned to face Sirius fully and shoved his glasses back on his face. Over the course of 5 minutes, his attention drifted to Regulus' distraction at least a dozen times. He appeared just as distracted as Regulus. Mad. Trying his novel again, Regulus flipped back a few pages, trying to find some context. There was a sword fight happening, and he couldn't recall what triggered it. He frowned at the book, completely bewildered by the storyline. Finally he caved and started back at the beginning. Sirius, darling, Effie called down the hallway. She appeared in the doorway and gestured to him. May I have your help with these? I wanted to set them up for the holiday. Holding up a stack of records, she nodded towards the front room. Jamie mentioned you set a record-changing spell at school. Of course, Sirius agreed, leaping to his feet. It sets them on automatic loop for parties. They just play through and then switch auto. Peter cursed under his breath as Sirius disappeared down the hallway. That's going to take a while, I reckon. It's nice knowing you, Regulus. Ignoring the helpless tone, Regulus kept his eyes trained on the novel and gripped Peter's arm. He spoke quietly out the side of his mouth. Stay. Potter was out of his chair instantaneously, striding towards them. When he reached the end of the settee they were perched on, he arched an eyebrow at Peter and crossed his arms over his chest. Regulus felt Peter tense as he fidgeted in his seat, but he held him in place. Clearing his throat, Potter leaned down to Peter's level. Leave. Yeah, all right. Peter folded, wrenching his arm free and bolting from the room. Regulus closed his eyes and breathed deeply, trying to center himself. That was completely. Potter gripped his chin and kissed him hard. Dropping his book into his lap, Regulus flayed his hands and gasped as he pulled back abruptly. Regulus slapped his face hard enough to leave a mark. He whipped out his wand and shoved it into Potter's belly. His face burned, cheeks arching with the force of a blush. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Showing you that I'm not straight, Potter replied, winching as his hands rubbed his cheek. Regulus felt his face drain of color. What? I like both. Shrugging, Potter stepped back. You weren't going to believe me any other way. So you can't just snuck me because you want to prove a point. Potter sighed. Talking doesn't work with you. Every time I've tried, you either jinx me or lose your shit. He dropped down onto the sofa and crossed his arms on his chest. What do you want from me, Regulus? I'm not that deep. Nothing. Liar. Anger boiled below the surface, but Regulus kept it contained. Do you truly think so highly of yourself that you cannot conceive of someone not being attracted to you? Potter tilted his head to the side. No, but your words don't match your action, and I want to know why. If you do fancy me, you should know that is not a problem. I don't, Regulus snapped, pulling himself upright and straightening his shirt. so leave me alone." "Then why do you flush when I touch you?" Potter asked, eyes searching Regulus intensely. "You knew I was going to snog you just now. I could tell. Yet you didn't prevent it. I figured you wanted it." Shaking his head virtuously, Regulus pressed his lips together. He was not about to acknowledge that truth. Of course he knew that the kiss was coming. The look on Potter's eyes practically gave it away. His ridiculous body simply refused to flee when he saw it. Far different from the chaste kiss on his cheek in the alcove, this one was intense. Potter leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't understand you, Regulus. You let me get just close enough to see what I'm missing out on, and then you shove me away." Regulus grimaced. "No, you insist on invading my personal space, and then act offended when it's not reciprocated. That's not the same thing." Disappointment washed over Potter's face. "You really don't—" "Not now. Not ever." So, hello. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. But honestly, wow. 2 kisses in 1 chapter. That's progress from a certain point of view, I suppose. The ending is not really progress. That's honestly it's a bit 1 step forward and 2 steps back. At the moment, it feels like, at least. I hope you like this chapter. Have a very nice day. And I am going to shut up again.